Hello everyone, my name is Marek Rudak. Thank you so much for tuning into my talk on Saint Faustina's diary and how it changed my perspectives on suffering. Are you going through suffering right now that doesn't seem warranted? Perhaps you got a bad performance review or got laid off. Maybe you're facing a divorce or you're stuck in a bad relationship. Or perhaps you're having a hard time finding the right partner. Suffering can shake our faith and cause us to question God's love for us. But my friends, it is possible to find beauty amidst suffering. During our time together, I will share with you the painful experiences in my life that led me to look deeper into the topic of suffering. We will also explore 4 strategies that will help you grow through difficult times. And along the way, I will share with you excerpts from Saint Faustina's diary. Now, for those of you who don't know who Saint Faustina is, she was a Polish nun who had visions of Jesus and had conversations with him, which she later documented in a diary. Since Saint Faustina had such an intimate relationship with Jesus, it's easy for us to assume that she had an easy life. Life that was filled with supernatural grace and no opposition, but that could not be further from the truth. She suffered from advanced tuberculosis and died at the age of 33. She experienced humiliation and rejection most frequently by her very own sisters at the convent. Even deeper still, she suffered from understanding the depths of Jesus' mercy and then seeing us frequently reject that mercy. Now, to tell you about myself, I grew up in an abusive home. For the first 14 years of my life, I lived with my grandfather, where I felt like I constantly walked on eggshells. In fact, I remember always trying to avoid him, which was hard in a roughly 1,000 square foot apartment. His approval was changing and always conditional. For example, the only time I remember him complimenting me was when I sold a bike to a friend. He kept saying all these praises about me, about how great of an entrepreneur I was. It felt awesome. But then I realized something was wrong. His speech began to slur. He was drunk. As crazy as it sounds, back then I wished that my grandfather would get drunk more often, because that's the only time I remember him saying good things about me. It felt amazing. I wanted more of that. My dad didn't live with us, and he died when I was 10 years old. I didn't realize at the time, but the lack of a healthy father figure in my life created this starvation within me for validation. That's why I became so obsessed with accomplishments, because I felt that through accomplishments, I would be able to get that validation that I never got as a child. So I studied hard, and that got me accepted to West Point. At West Point, I graduated in the top 10% of my class. Later, after graduation, I volunteered to be an airborne ranger, fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then I made my way into corporate America, where I got a high-paying job at ExxonMobil. So whether it was tabs or badges on my uniforms or big paychecks in my bank, I thought that these types of accomplishments would fill in that hole that got created in my childhood, in my heart. When I was 30, I went through a very nasty divorce, super painful. But even then, I had my work to throw myself into. For example, I requested an expat assignment in Angola because I wanted to move to a continent where nobody knows me. I could start fresh and throw myself into work so much that I forget what happened. And to be fair, for a period of time it worked. A few years after my divorce, I was dating again, and it felt like my life was slowly coming together. It wasn't great, but it seemed like it was heading in the right direction. But then, my world as I knew it blew up. You see, at Exxon, we have a very rigid ranking system where everybody gets ranked top to bottom. And for many years, I did very well. But then, out of nowhere, I found out that I was ranked in the bottom third of my ranking group. For the first time in my life, I became afraid of losing my job. But even more important than that, losing the very badge of honor that I used for so many years to numb out the pain. I had many sleepless nights, and I got gripped with anxiety. The few nights that I did sleep, I frequently had nightmares that were so real, so vivid, that when I woke up, it usually took me a few good minutes to sort out what was true and what was a dream. My search for finding meaning in my suffering led me to Saint Faustina's diary, which I picked up at a Catholic conference. Now, to be honest with you, at first I came across passages that to say nicely did not seem helpful. Passages like this one. "Oh my Jesus, I understand well that just as illness is measured with a thermometer and a high fever tells us the seriousness of the illness, so also in the spiritual life, suffering is the thermometer which measures the love of God in a soul." You see, I wasn't opposed to suffering. After all, serving in the military was challenging, so was working in developing countries like Angola. But I was only okay with that suffering if there was some kind of a big reward at the other side. Something I could pin on my uniform or later cash in my bank, something that would make me look better in front of other people. But here in the diary, I read that suffering is the reward itself. I mean, can you imagine a TV commercial that says, "Suffering is the thermometer which measures the love of God in a soul"? Who would buy that product? It took me a while, but I eventually found my answer in the following passage. "Suffering is a great grace. Through suffering, the soul becomes like the Savior. In suffering, love becomes crystallized. The greater the suffering, the purer the love." Going through this anxiety where I thought that I was going to lose my job forced me to face some very difficult things about myself. For one, I realized just how dependent I became on worldly validation. Accomplishments became my God, not Jesus Christ. Once I realized that, I allowed the Lord into my heart to heal the wounds that caused this obsession with accomplishments. Had I not suffered, I would have never done that. I also became a much more compassionate person. I'll be honest with you, I used to look down on people who lost their jobs. I thought that they either did something wrong or they just simply didn't cut the mustard, so they had to step it up. I also realized through suffering that, quite frankly, I didn't like my job at ExxonMobil. Yes, I was anxious about losing it, but it was not the job itself, it was the money and the prestige that, quite frankly, I began to take for granted. But once the Lord healed my heart from this obsession with accomplishments, I realized that ExxonMobil is not the place for me. I decided to start my own business. So in the end, I didn't get fired or got laid off. I left on my own terms to help men grow from divorce and start the next chapter. I would have never even considered taking this big leap of faith had I not suffered. Obviously, I still go through difficult times right now, but I am so much happier pursuing the dream that God placed in my heart. So what I'd like to do next is I'd like to share with you four strategies that will help you grow through difficult situations based on St. Faustina's diary. So here's number one. Start a journal. So I know that this one might seem almost too obvious given how this talk is based on a diary, but here's why journaling is important. And this is Jesus speaking to St. Faustina. "When you reflect upon what I tell you in the depths of your heart, you profit more than if you had read many books. Oh, if souls would only want to listen to my voice when I am speaking in the depths of their hearts, they would reach the peak of holiness in a short time." In my prayers, I used to ask God for specific things only. When I didn't get those things, I became discouraged, and that drew me away from God. Now, there's nothing wrong with asking God for help, but through journaling, I was able to go much deeper. Instead of just stuffing my emotions down, in the privacy of my journal, I was able to articulate to the Lord how I truly felt. And that led me to a much more meaningful relationship with Him. So please don't hesitate to be honest with the Lord, what's really on your heart. Here's an excerpt from the diary that illustrates the importance of that. And again, this is Jesus speaking to St. Faustina. "What are you afraid of? If you are with me, who will dare touch you? Nevertheless, I am very pleased that you confide your fears to me, my daughter. Speak to me about everything in a completely simple and human way. By this you will give me great joy. I understand you because I'm a God-man. This simple language of your heart is more pleasing to me than the hymns composed in my honor. Know, my daughter, that the simpler your speech is, the more you attract me to yourself. And now, be at peace close to my heart." Number two, assume positive intent. So our biological design makes it more difficult for us to persevere through suffering. That's because our brains react far more strongly to negative news. This is actually very helpful when avoiding imminent danger. Let's say you're going down the highway, somebody cuts you off. Our brains would automatically purge whatever we're thinking about so we can focus on getting on safety. But it's not so helpful when we try to grow through suffering because our brains will automatically focus first on things that we don't have, on the setbacks, rather than the growth. That's because negative information gives our nervous system a huge surge in electrical activity. That's why good news becomes so forgettable. And political campaigns are a perfect example. Right now we're in the middle of a campaign season. None of us like nastiness in our life, but yet we elect politicians that smear each other. That's because good behaving politicians are simply too forgettable at the election booth. That's why whenever we go through difficult situations and we have this onslaught of negative thoughts, it's very important to assume positive intent, to think like a child. And here are a few words from a conversation Saint Faustina had with a mother directress. Sister, let simplicity and humility be the characteristic traits of your soul. Go through life like a little child, always trusting, always full of simplicity and humility, content with everything, happy in every circumstance. There, where others fear, you will pass calmly along, thanks to this simplicity and humility. Remember this, sister, for your whole life, as waters flow from the mountains down into the valleys, so too do God's graces flow only into humble souls. When I thought that I was going to lose my job, I felt like God was punishing me. I thought that I did all the right things, and what was happening to me was great injustice. But knowing what I know now, I realized that God allowed this to happen to bring about something greater. I'm by no means perfect, but nowadays, whenever I go through difficult situations, I always make it a point to assume positive intent, to count my blessings, to think about all these other times when God came through for me, because I know that in due time, He will do so again. Number 3, practice servant leadership. So even though Saint Faustina suffered a lot, she always looked for ways to be a more loving person. Acts of service remind us what's truly important. They can help us put our suffering in perspective. And here's a short excerpt from the diary that illustrates this very well. Where there is genuine virtue, there must be sacrifice as well. One's whole life must be a sacrifice. It is only by means of sacrifice that souls can become useful. It is my self-sacrifice which in my relationship with my neighbor can give glory to God. But God's love must flow through this sacrifice, because everything is concentrated in this love and takes its value from it. The military is very good about teaching servant leadership. When I was a rifle platoon leader, I was the first one to jump out of the airplane and then the last one to go through the chow line. I didn't do it because I was told to. I did it because I really enjoyed it. See, when we serve other people, that takes our focus away from our situation, our suffering. We see other people benefit, and that makes everyone feel better. Number 4, grow your prayer life. So here's what St. Faustina's diary says about prayer. Jesus gave me to understand how a soul should be faithful to prayer despite torments, dryness, and temptations, because oftentimes the realization of God's plans depends mainly on such prayer. If we do not persevere in such prayer, we frustrate what the Lord wanted to do through us or within us. Let every soul remember these words. And being in anguish, he prayed longer. I think we all understand the importance of prayer, but where the problem comes into play is when things don't change in spite of our best intentions. I went through the most significant period of spiritual dryness in my life during COVID-19. See, at the end of February, I published my book, The Love-Driven Man. I had all these events lined up to promote it, and they all got canceled due to COVID-19. I remember praying to God, asking for guidance, but not only did I not get any guidance, I lost the sense of God's presence in my life, and that really freaked me out. Because I have no problem taking steps of faith, but losing that sense of God's presence in my life made me wonder, hey, did I drink too much Kool-Aid? Did I do something wrong? Did God abandon me? It really freaked me out because it wasn't just a few hours, few days, it was for weeks at a time. But I was really blessed to have talked to a priest who explained to me how Jesus sometimes withdraws himself from us to invite us to a greater union. And this is to teach us to love him for who he really is, rather than the spiritual candy that some of us get used to at the beginning of our faith journey. He also suggested for me to grow in my prayer life, which I did by incorporating the liturgy of the hours into my prayer routine. And obviously I still have my difficult moments, I still have my challenges, but I got the sense of God's presence back in my life. And now that I have it back, it's that much more precious to me. So my friends, whenever you're going through difficult times or you feel like you're going through spiritual dryness, please ask yourself, how can I grow in my prayer life? So to wrap up, my friends, suffering is hard. It never gets easy, but it does get easier when we walk through it with the Lord. So whenever you're struggling, please give these 4 strategies a try. Number 1, start a journal. Number 2, assume positive intent. Number 3, practice servant leadership. And number 4, grow in your prayer life. So I'd like to leave you with some final words of encouragement from St. Faustina's diary. I see that God never tries us beyond what we're able to suffer. Oh, I fear nothing. If God sends such great suffering to a soul, He upholds it with an even greater grace, although we're not aware of it. One act of trust at such moments gives greater glory to God than whole hours passed in prayer filled with consolations. So my friends, whenever you find yourself in moments of suffering, please remember this. God, however, comes to our aid, but we have to ask Him for it. Let no one trust too much in his own self. My friends, thank you so much for listening. You'll be my prayers. God bless you, and I hope to see you soon.